Let's talk about the question that has been baffling people for years, and that is crochet versus knitting. Which one is better and which one should you try? Hey friends, welcome to my room. We're gonna have a little cozy chat about two of my favorite things, crocheting and knitting. A lot of times when people find out that I like to do both, they're always asking me, which one's your favorite? And I have such a hard time answering that. And I'm gonna talk about why in this video. There are both pros and cons to crocheting versus knitting. And depending on really what you wanna get out of this craft, one is going to be better for you. Before we get into the pros and cons, I want to give you a little background to my crafting history and where I've started in terms of crocheting and knitting. So let's rewind to like 11 years ago. I don't know. When I was in middle school, okay, so a long time ago, I was in middle school, and that is when I was first introduced to this idea of knitting and crocheting. So my friend taught me how to knit originally. Didn't get far with it. I still have the very first thing that I knitted. It was supposed to be a scarf. It did not make it past square land. I increased where it wasn't supposed to, and I probably lost some stitches where I weren't supposed to. And I didn't even learn how to purl. This was strictly just like the knit stitch. But I did it, and I learned it, and it was okay. And I really wanted to learn because my friend really liked to knit, and I always wanted to do things that my friend liked to do. That was kind of what motivated me to try that. But then she introduced me to a little thing called crocheting, and I picked up crocheting so much quicker than I did knitting, and I was hooked. Okay, that was a bad crochet joke, but I was hooked since then. Originally learned how to knit, switched over to the dark side, the crocheting side, and it was going so much faster for me, and I was seeing, you know, quicker results, and if I messed up, it was easier for me to fix it, and so I said bye-bye to knitting, and I didn't look at knitting until for about like 10 years. I didn't touch knitting. So I really like hung on to that crochet identity. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, I want to say it's February right now. It's not this past New Year, but the New Year before. I had decided that in the year of 2023, I really wanted to learn how to knit, because at that point I had been crocheting for a really long time. And even though I learned how to crochet when I was in middle school, there were definitely times within that time frame where I didn't crochet anything for months or even probably years. Or I would become really hyper fixated on something and I would be crocheting constantly for 3 months. So I would kind of put my skill set rating at intermediate. I probably should be a lot better than I am, but I wasn't consistently working on my crocheting for those 10 plus years that I knew how to crochet, if that makes sense. But I really wanted to learn how to knit. And so I asked that same friend back in middle school. Here's her Instagram, by the way. She's awesome. You should definitely check out her stuff. And said, hey, I want to learn how to knit. Can you teach me how to knit again? Just like you did way back when. And she said, yes, of course, let's do it. So she taught me how to knit, and I started on, again, another scarf that I've never finished. Public service announcement. If you get bored easily with projects, don't make scarves and don't make blankets. I have never successfully finished. Okay, that's not true. I have made some scarves, but it was like a long, long time ago. So start with something that has like a short journey to that finish line, okay? So she showed me how to knit again, showed me how to purl. Technically she showed me how to purl incorrectly, but it's okay, we're past that. Then I just kind of worked on this little scarf, and I was just practicing different stitches and different combinations of how to knit and how to purl. And you know, I would kind of, over the next couple months, I would pick it up every once in a while, but I was still crocheting. I never really finished any, actually I didn't, I never finished any knitting projects. Fast forward into 2023, at the end of the summer, I came upon this awesome fiber arts group that met at a local library, and it was during the day, and I was still on summer break. I'm a teacher. And so I decided, hey, what the heck, let's go, let's do this. So I bring my crocheting there, and it was awesome. It was so much fun, but unfortunately I wouldn't have been able to go to any more meetings because I was getting ready to start work, to start school. And I found out at this meeting that there's a local group who meets on Tuesdays at a Panera, and it's a women of all ages, and it's in the evenings at 6 p.m. So I was able to do that. So then I started going to that group. And at that group, I bring my crocheting, and there was a mix of crocheters and knitters and other kind of fiber arts, but there were definitely a lot of knitters. From being at that group, it sparked my interest again in knitting, and I was like, you know what? I want to make something. I want to make a project for knitting. And so I decided I wanted to make a sweater. So my first project, finished knitting project, was a sweater. I actually filmed a video about it. So check that out if you haven't seen it yet. I am someone that when I learn a new skill, if I'm not good at it from the beginning, I don't want it. I don't want to do it. So I knew whatever knitted item that I made, I would want it to be good and something that I would realistically see myself using or wearing. So a lot of people don't start with a sweater as their first project because it is a big, long time consuming project, but that's just really what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to do it well. So prior to me starting my project, I practiced all the knitting skills that I would need to complete the sweater. So I practiced my knit and my purl stitches. I practiced ribbing, so going back and forth from knit and purl. I practiced increases and decreases. I think that's it. And I practiced it like in the knitting needle size and yarn that I was planning on using for my sweater, so that way I felt really comfortable with the materials that I was going to be using. And so then when it finally came time for me to do my sweater, you can see the whole process of everything in the video, but it actually turned out really well, and I was really happy with my outcome of it. And I love that sweater. I love wearing it. It's starting to get warm and I'm not gonna be able to wear it anymore, and it makes me sad, but it was a really, really fun project. Since the sweater, I've done a couple of knitting projects. So my first was the sweater. My second project was a shawl that I made for my mom. Here's a picture of it here. And then my third project was a pair of socks. And then my my fourth project was another pair of socks, and I filmed a video about these ones. I love making socks, by the way, they're so much fun. So that is kind of all the knitting experience that I have. And I have my current work in progress is this. I'm making like a summer top, and I am filming a video about it, so more about that later. Yeah, so that's kind of my knitting experience versus my crochet experience, and that probably took a lot longer than it needed to take, but I just thought that that was an important thing for you to kind of understand like where I'm coming from in terms of crocheting versus knitting. Let's get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Let's get into our pros and cons versus knitting and crocheting. And I want to preface that these are all my opinions based off of my experiences and based off of my knowledge and talent in both of these two crafts, okay? So it is 100% okay if you disagree, and if you do disagree, like, please let me know. I want to know what your opinion on this is. I would love to have a conversation about it in the comments and chat with other people and see kind of what they think, because this is a topic that there really isn't a right or wrong answer, but these are just my answers. I'm gonna start with a big one because I feel like this is the one that people are most curious about, and which one is more beginner friendly. In my opinion, that definitely is going to be crocheting. Crocheting is more beginner friendly for a couple of reasons. One, if you mess up in crocheting, it is a lot easier to go back and fix it. You're only working with one open stitch at a time, versus with knitting, you're having all of your stitches open at a time. So when you mess up in knitting, if you don't know what to do, it's not as, the answer doesn't come as naturally as it does with crocheting. And so I found, and I think that's kind of why when I first originally learned how to knit, but then switched to crocheting, I stuck onto crocheting because I felt like I could figure out the problems on my own without having to look to some outside resource. So I always tell my students or friends who are wanting to learn either how to crochet or knit, I always say I really think you should start with crocheting just because of the fact that it is a lot more beginner friendly. Another difference between the two are going to be the accessories that you need. And right now it kind of seems like I'm favoring crocheting, but don't worry, we definitely will flip-flop. But for crocheting, you really just need like a good set of different size of hooks, a darning needle, and a couple stitch markers, and obviously yarn. And you're pretty much good to go. From there, you can make a lot of different things. With knitting, however, there's kind of another level of things that you might need, and there's definitely ways you can get around it and be more affordable and kind of use what you have. But you have like your normal knitting needles, you have the straight knitting needles, but then you also have circular knitting needles, and then you also can have DPNs, which is double pointed needles, and all the different sizes that range around there. And then obviously you need stitch markers. You might need closed stitch markers, or you might need open stitch markers. And if you want to do cables, not everyone uses, but it is an option. You can have special cable needles, stitch holders. Now there's ways to get around using stitch holders. You can use scrap yarn, but there's just like a lot that can go into it depending on what you're needing. So I feel like starting off, it's easier just to have like all the stuff for crocheting versus for knitting, you kind of slowly have to build your collection of accessories, if that makes sense. A pro of knitting, in my opinion, is it uses less yarn. So if you don't really know that, I guess I probably should have explained this earlier, the main differences between knitting and crocheting. So crocheting, you are making knots and you're using a hook. So you have one hook, you have yarn, and it's a series of making knots. Knitting, you're using two needles and it is weaving yarn together. So you've got knots and you've got weaving. The weaving tends to use less yarn than the knots. That being said, crocheting is faster than knitting is, depending on your personal speed. For me, I'm a faster crocheter than I am a knitter. Now let's talk a little bit about the product that both of them make. If you're wanting something that's going to be plush and cozy and soft and comfy, knitting is going to be your answer 100%. If you want something more structured or mesh or even decorative in a way, crocheting is going to be more what you want. Like there's some things that I would crochet and never knit, and there's some things that I would knit and never crochet. Like I'm never going to make a crocheted sweater. I've made cardigans, but I'm not making a crocheted sweater. I'm going to knit that because I want that to be cozy. But then like for bags, I'm not going to make a knitted bag. I'm going to make a crocheted bag because that kind of holds things together. So depending on what product you want to make, each one's going to have its pros and its cons for that product. The next item that I want to talk about is the process versus the product. Do I enjoy the process more or do I enjoy the product more? So for crocheting, I definitely like the product more than the process. And I think a lot of this has to come down to my tension. I am a rather tight tension crocheter, which makes my hand cramp up, which makes me not really enjoy the movements after a while because it starts to hurt. But I love what I make and I love what I'm able to crochet. Versus knitting is more therapeutic for me. I'm definitely more in it for the process. I don't care if a project is going to take me a long time because I just like the idea of picking something up and working with my hands. Versus crocheting, I'm trying to figure out what's the quickest way that I can get this product out of it. So that's just, again, all of this really is a personal preference, but I find myself enjoying the time that I'm sitting down and knitting more than the time that I'm sitting down and crocheting. And I know that different people are gonna have different opinions on this specific one, and that is okay. Let me know what you think down below. Really, in terms of knitting versus crocheting, I think bottom line, it comes down to what do you want to achieve from this craft? What are you trying to make? And what are you trying to get out of it? Are you just trying to get out a product, or are you trying to enjoy the process and use it almost as a meditative like experience? What do you want out of it? And that's really what it comes down to. I absolutely love crocheting. I absolutely love knitting, and I love being able to do both of them. I think there's a time and a place for both of them. Also really awesome ways that you can combine them together and use both of those skills in one project. Now, bottom line, if you're a beginner and you're trying to decide, do I start with crocheting and do I start with knitting? My opinion is I would start with crocheting. Mostly just because of the beginner friendliness of it, and I feel like it teaches you ways for you to hold your yarn that become really helpful in knitting later on. That being said, if you already know how to crochet, I 100% encourage you to give knitting a try. It's gonna feel so weird for the first week or so when you're practicing, but I promise that your hands and your brain will adjust and you will end up loving it. And vice versa, if you are strictly a knitter, I highly encourage you to give crocheting a try. I think people should know how to do both, and I love getting to talk to people and connect with them, whether they crochet or whether they knit. I encourage you to try something new and let me know how it goes. Even though I would recommend crocheting for beginners, I do want to mention that currently if I had to choose between the one, I'm definitely enjoying knitting more right now than I do crocheting. And that's not to say that I hate crocheting, I still absolutely love it, but I find that I'm picking up my knitting a lot more than I am my crocheting. I think a part of it is just because it's new and I'm doing new skills and I'm creating new things that I've never done before. If you had to ask me which one I prefer, as of right now on February 19th, 2024, I prefer knitting. Ask me again later and we'll see if it changes. I want to hear in the comments below, what are your opinions on this subject? If you know how to do both, which one do you recommend for beginners? And then I also want to know, what projects are you working on right now? I love hearing about everyone's projects and it gives me motivation, and I think you guys seeing other people's projects will help give you motivation. So let's start a conversation down below and talk about what everyone thinks about this. Thank you so much for joining me in this little fiber arts crafty dialogue. If you liked this video, it would mean so much to me if you subscribed. It is such an easy, free way for you to support my channel and the stuff that I'm making and doing. And if you want something else to do, here's some other videos that you could check out. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one, or I will see you down below in the comments. Bye.